Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is breaking the spell. We are raised with all kinds of messaging about who we are and what our capabilities are. And what if all of that is a spell that is cast upon us that we then internalize? What might be available to us if we were able to break the spell? Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to be here with you and with everybody else who's joining us. Before we get started talking about breaking the spell, let's take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together, vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the pressure, the motion, the temperature, and the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome. So today we're going to talk about spells. And we could also think about it as hypnosis or programming or conditioning. And it's a spell because we never think to question it, right? We're raised, often many of us are raised with lots and lots of negative messaging to tell us that we're stupid or we're not smart enough or we're too demanding or we're weak or any number of messages that are gifted us by parents, by environments, by schools, by just living. And when we're told these things, particularly as children, we don't know to challenge them. And even if we do challenge them, it's like they've become sort of a mind worm, where they are working on us and we're challenging them to fight against that notion that we might be those things that we're being told we are. So the rebelling against them in its own way is affirming those things as some kind of truth or reality. So when we wake up to the awareness that these are spells that have been cast, and we can recognize them as spells or as programming, as hypnosis, as conditioning, we then have the power to choose differently. When we become, our awareness actually denatures the spell. So if I find myself giving myself these messages, so I grew up with certain messaging, I rebelled against it a lot. And then I went off to college, and my parents weren't there as a foil against which I could push. And what I noticed was that I didn't need them to be giving me messaging, because I was giving it to myself. I had adopted it as my own. And I think that this is a pretty standard practice. The beliefs that we have about ourselves, it's like spells have been cast upon us to believe this, and then that becomes the reality. Good morning, Dido. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. We're talking about breaking the spell and how we live with these spells or hypnosis, programming, conditioning that we have just adopted as reality. And so when we can identify them, when we can bring them to light as the spell that they are, rather than the fact that we believe them to be, that's the beginning of denaturing them, because we can recognize when the spell is at work. And when we can identify that, when we can recognize that, we can say, oh, that's a spell, and I have free will, and I can choose differently. That's not the truth. That's a spell. And as we free ourselves from these spells that have become beliefs, that have become truths for us, as we lift the veil, what is then available to us? Let's look at who could we be if we were free of that spell. It's easy to fall back into the spell because we've practiced it so deeply and so religiously for so long, because we believed it to be true. But when we allow ourselves to question it or to identify it, to call it out, we can then say, oh, that's just a spell. We can put it aside. We can start to explore who we can be beyond the dimensions of that spell. Who can we be if we're not stupid, or we're not incapable, or we're not deficient in some way or another? Without that spell, we have a whole new world available to us to explore, and a whole new way of being to explore, because those spells that were cast were sent by somebody as a projection of their own limitations, their own defenses, their own perceptions, their own histories. And we just imbibed them, absorbed them as truth. So why? Well, a parent is a person who is indoctrinating us based on their own experience, perception, history, wounds, their own weaknesses, their own hurts. And as children, that is creating our world. It is really, truly casting a spell. It's really, truly putting a veil of of programming, conditioning, orientation, indoctrination. And even if it's from a wonderful parent, we're still gaining our orientation to the world and to ourselves as reflected from that parent or that caregiver or that family member or that teacher or the people that are influencing us, particularly when we're young, are helping to shape this whole dynamic that we then repeat and repeat and repeat, even if we're fighting against it. So when I was pretty rebellious as a kid, and I was fighting against these perceptions of me that at least I interpreted those perceptions, and in fighting against them, really what was happening is I was trying to protect myself from them, but I already had that belief. The spell was already at work. And I think that this notion, like contextualizing this awareness of our conditioning as a spell, is empowering in a new way, other than talking about limiting beliefs. If we can recognize that there's this, if we can think about it as a spell, for example, it's not ours in the way that a belief is. It's something that we are at the effect of, and when we can recognize, oh, that's the spell, it gives us an opportunity to make a different choice, to actually choose, to say, oh, if that's a spell, who do I choose to be? So Rosalind says, requires courage to beat your own drum and large doses of compassion for settling into the new self. Well, yeah, and courage too. As you said, it requires courage. And I don't think it does require courage because it's stepping into an unknown to a great degree. And you may not find agreement externally, right? But as we recognize that we have been so absorbed by that spell, that we have lived into it, that we have fulfilled its promise in certain ways because we've had this hypnotized behavior. We've been taught maybe that we're not good enough. So we bring I'm not good enough to every situation. When we can recognize it as a spell, we can say, oh, wow, that's the spell. What if I am good enough? What if that's just noise? It's another way to access these beliefs that we've internalized, and to recognize, wait a second, that's not me. That's not mine. And so, yes, it takes courage to say, that's not me. So if that's not me, and that's who I've known myself to be, who am I? And that takes courage to step into that exploration of who am I without that spell. And some of us will choose to keep the spell just because at least we then know who we are. There's a comfort in knowing, even if it's not a happy knowing, at least we know, which is kind of sad that we will choose the devil we know instead of the devil we don't, just because it's familiar. We'll choose our limitations, or we will hold limitations because it's more comfortable than exploring the broader potential. And so if we can imagine ourselves enshrouded with all these spells and taking them off, lifting those veils one by one, or maybe all at once, and allow our skin to feel the air, allow ourselves the freedom of movement that was constrained by those spells, then we get to discover something totally new and fresh. And we get to make new choices. And this conversation has been evolving a bit, but part of it came out of my cat, because we went across country together, and she's almost 17, and she surprised me at every turn. At every turn. At home, before we went away, she's almost 17, so she slept a lot. She still sleeps a lot, but her life was very limited, and she wasn't particularly adventurous or curious or all that engaged. And when we went away, she explored everything. If we were at a hotel, she would go and case out the whole room and find every nook and cranny. She was adventurous and curious and alive and vital. And it woke me out of a spell where I had been knowing her as this elder cat that had a very limited life. And since we've been back, I decided, having seen this vital person in there, I decided, and that's spelled P-U-R-R, person, by the way. I decided that I needed to keep that alive for her and for me. And so I took her to a park for the first time, actually, ever. And she explored the grass. She got her feet wet. She was in the sun. She was in the shade. She walked all over the place. And there was this whole new animal. So for me, what happened was the spell of who she was broken, so that I was able to recognize that she's so much more and has so much more potential than I had even imagined. And I recognize that that's true not only of my darling cat, Jewel, but it's true of all of us. And so I was under a spell about who she is. And I recognize that we are under a spell, under spells, multiple spells. It's just another way of speaking about it, about who we are and what we're capable of. So I invite you to look inside, look at the messaging that you've received about who you are. You could even source it. Was it a father? Was it a mother? So many of us just live our lives at the effect of all of that conditioning that we've then internalized in some way, shape, or form. And if we can itemize the elements of that spell, if we can make them conscious, if we can shine light on them, then we can recognize them when they show up in our behavior and say, oh, that's just the spell. And what do I choose? So it brings us to a place of presence, real presence, rather than automation. So these spells, it is just programming. We've been told these things and we believe them. We were hypnotized into believing them. And then we lived out of that belief. And what would happen if we can say, oh no, that's just a belief. That's just a spell. It's not the truth. Beliefs, I think it's maybe easier for us to work with it as a spell than a belief, again, because our beliefs, we believe that we are our beliefs. We believe our beliefs are true. Whereas when we look at this as a spell, we can recognize that it's something that was imposed from outside and that it then shaped us. And those spells are cast probably with lack of awareness. As parents, I don't believe, even the worst parents, I was going to say, I don't believe that there's malice of intent. In some cases there is. In some cases there is. The thing is that it's coming from a wounded source. Again, just another human that is operating in reaction to their own lives, their own experiences, their own wounds. And even if they are operating out of good intention, it's still a projection of maybe their own hypnosis, maybe the spells that they've been living under. You can look at beliefs around money and attitudes about money that we're indoctrinated into. There are spells cast around that, indoctrinations, programming, that this is how we're taught. And if we can somehow, the thought of it being a spell makes it easier, for me anyway, to recognize it as other than myself. And I can, in separating myself from that spell, it gives me freedom to explore alternate ways of thinking, of being, of interacting. And there's a tremendous freedom in that. I'm wondering if you experience the same thing, like the distinction. If I say it's a limiting belief, it feels like it's part of me. If I say it's a spell, I can more readily recognize it as other than myself. And so who can we be? I mean, I think that this notion of relieving ourselves of these spells opens us to an unboundedness, opens us to a new capacity, new capabilities, new potentials that we might not otherwise have considered being bound by the spells. So I worked at, Rosalind says, opening questions help, like asking, how did that belief protect me? What danger is there if I let go of that belief? So the thing that I want to distinguish is, like you said, what danger is there if I let go of that belief? If it's a spell, the spell was cast. And I think what we get to do is to recognize it. And if it's more, the belief, just to me, it feels like it's more internalized, a belief. Like it's my identity versus it's something that was projected onto me. And so Dido says, that's such a profound distinction, limiting beliefs as part of us versus a spell which we don't have to internalize and which we can transmute. Thank you, Dido. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that when it's a belief, it's really wrapped up in my identity. When it's a spell, it's something that's overlaid somehow. And it feels more accessible to me anyway. And maybe it's a semantic manipulation, but to me, it feels more possible to transmute it, to let it fall away, because it's not part of my flesh and blood. It's something that is over top of me, and it's obscuring me versus it's part of me. So Rosalind, I don't know if that resonates for you, but I get like that we have these behaviors that we've developed in response to things as protections and to help us function. And it's useful to say, well, what is the function of that behavior or belief? But when we think of it as a spell, we can break the spell. And then what? Then who are we? It's a wonderful, wonderful discovery and path of discovery, actually. So maybe there's more to discuss here. But anyway, I just want to say thank you for providing the space for these kinds of conversations and for engaging with them. It's such a privilege. And that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel at, I don't know if I said it already, at 9 a.m. Eastern. And thank you so much, Rosalind and Dido. Dido says, thank you, Mira. Fascinating and powerful. Thank you. I am fascinated by this. So anyway, please check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. And until next time, so much love to you.